State funeral for the sanitation worker. Everyone came out and lined the street to see the hearse roll by, flags trailing behind it. All work stopped just for a moment for a few minutes of respect. Someone said they saw the accident. No, a rumor. They knew someone who said they saw. It didn't matter. Everyone had heard the story. The garbage man killed on the job. A freak accident. All agreed it was a tragedy. But it was the children who wept most, fascinated as they are by the work, by trash and trucks. And God, the trucks that day, as just then the march came, a gleaming phalanx. Dozens of garbage trucks, even an antique out from the museum, all adorned with pristine coveralls. We took off our hats. Children waved. The solemn parade marched on. As the crowd dispersed, a teenager whispered, "I heard they used to do this for police." No one believed him. "How dare you," said another, "insult the dignity of the sanitation men like that?" The streets were quiet and clean. No one had dared litter. We went back to work. The trash in the alley would wait till tomorrow for the strong hands of sanitation men. Deluge. 1. It shouldn't come as a surprise, but it always does. The water, what else? It goes everywhere. You never know how bad it is until it's happening or until it's over, even when you lived it before, because each time is worse and worse. The low ground floods, the high ground washes away. Where does it go? Each time it becomes easier to imagine, yes, the next one will be worse. I watched a man bicycle through a foot of floodwater. Our hero for the day, we elected him mayor. It was all we could do to cope. At least we had that. 2. Before I was born, there were men who knew, men who decided, men who lived still. I can't help but wonder if they understood the scale of the thing back then. Won't their children's children choke too on the hot, wet air? Ceteris paribus. It's of little comfort that these few might be confined to arks in perpetual care of flood waters when the rest of us have drowned, or worse, faces crushed twixt hull and berth, while they look at the sun in triumph, one last indignity upon the earth. If you find this image troubling, then let us turn to those who were left for dead as our guides the next time the floodwaters rise. I don't know when that will be, no one does. So for now, let us plant, root ourselves. When the water comes again, it shouldn't come as a surprise. 3. And the flood will come again, and it will be worse, and I wish this were in doubt. Hold fast. Unstable earth is mutable. Do you like the world just as it is? Grab yourself a shovel. There's no shortage of work to be done. Not that there ever was. Sometimes the answer to the question has to be restated, resaid, enacted, not redone, but done again for the first time. Things change, things stay the same. It won't be the same, this we know. The next one will be worse. Sand is for breakwaters, not foundations. So what if that old world is worth keeping? Scraps in compost is new earth in the making. Storms move quickly, the preparation is all, in that there is hope. Mighty trees do fall. Their bodies nourish and shade against new light, and the nose grows rich with wet life. When the waters come again, it won't be a surprise. But we could be. Thank you.
Welcome to Labor Writing in Philly, a presentation of the 20th anniversary 215 Festival. That was Matthew Sekelic, a writer and artist from upstate New York, living in Philadelphia, working in and around theater, and preoccupied with questions of labor and capital. His essays, poems, and scholarship have appeared in Protean, Howlround, Jacobin, Prolit, Peach Mag, Theater Journal, and studies in musical theater. His plays include The Life and Afterlife of Uncle Sam and an adaptation of the film noir Detour. My name is Jeff Waxman. I'm the programming advisor with the festival. And if you like today's event, you can keep up with festival events all year round by signing up for our newsletter at 215festival.org. This event has closed captioning available. Click the CC button at the bottom of your screen to turn on or off the closed captioning. And note, this event is being recorded. Our panelists tonight, and there are plenty of them, are coming from the worlds of letters and labor. Charles Patton is a union leader and cook at Bar Simon and has worked at the Philadelphia International Airport for 7 years. He's an executive board member with Unite Here Local 274 and has successfully led the fight to raise the minimum wage at the airport to $15 an hour. He's currently leading his coworkers to secure affordable healthcare for all airport workers. Nice to see you, Charles.
Great to be here.
Patrick Blagrave, maybe, is a poet, editor, and debtor from Philadelphia. He is the author of Profit from Recenter Press 2020, and the founder and editor of Prolit Magazine, publishing writing and art about money, work, and class. Some of his poems have been published in Peace, Land, and Bread, Recenter Press Poetry Journal, Madhouse Magazine, Apiary, and Bedfellows. Juliana Feliciano Reyes is an investigative reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer who spent the last 3 years as the Inquirer's labor reporter. She plays with, you're going to have to tell me if I do this wrong, but Uriel, a traditional Korean drumming group, and is working on a book of essays and recipes about the Filipinx potluck she helps organize. And Ryan Nissim Sabat has been an organizer for over 20 years with the Hospitality Workers Union, Unite Here Local 274. He coordinates the union's program at all 3 sports stadiums and the Hospitality Academy, the union's recruitment and job training program. That's the crew for tonight. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. And that is the interrelationship of media, of writing, and labor here in Philadelphia. To begin with, I'd like to offer up a pretty broad question, and by all means, everybody unmic your, mic up. We don't need this this silence. We're hopefully going to have a pretty freewheeling conversation here for our many fans. We can do without the decorum. But we're going to start with something fairly broad. What first got you interested in writing or organizing around labor issues? And what's a formative experience that you had on the front lines as a writer, an activist, or a worker? And feel free to just jump in. Or I'll call on you. Ryan, it is. Go for it, Ryan.
First, I was going to go Juliana. I think one experience that that really moved me when I was in college, I went to Virginia Tech. I'm from Virginia. And we started doing organizing in this trailer park. And we just were knocking on doors. This trailer park was owned by one man, Randy Alcorn. And there was over 70 trailers, and so just talking to folks in the trailer park about the gutters and about the waste and about the glass on the street. It really moved me in terms of the power of face-to-face organizing, knocking on doors, talking to people, finding leaders, and then moving us to action. And so I did some community organizing and labor organizing, and have always been moved by that work. I mean, in our union in Unite Here, we find leaders like Charles by knocking on doors and building relationships and taking on the boss together. And my father talks about the moment when he was a a teacher in Chicago, and when they went on strike, and how he laid down on in front of the vans from passing, and just how formative that was in his years. And so I think about those experiences, and so yeah, that's kind of why I'm here. My son in the background. Forget the decorum, right?
Yeah, it's a big tent. Labor's for everyone.
Right, that's right.
Juliana, would you like to?
Organizers, okay.
Sure. So my second journalism job was at a tech news publication called Technically, and I did a lot of reporting on the local tech scene in Philadelphia, and primarily talked to founders and founders of startups and people at the very top, and people who invested in startups. And there was a point a few years in when I did a story that was all about the rank and file workers at a startup, and how they didn't actually know what the company did in order to make money when they first started. Like they were told it was an advertising tech company, when it turned out they made malware, and they found this out later. And basically it showed me that like the people at the top will say one thing, and the actual workers will like actually tell you the real thing. And so that was a formative moment for me, when I was like, yeah, the people I really need to be talking to are the workers. And the other reason that I got interested in writing about labor was really just thinking about my own working conditions. I was, my second job, I was writing like 4 to 6 like stories a day, and working like really long hours and getting paid just a little bit. And I think like a lot of us have that experience where we're like, oh, we're all sort of like, we're all sort of like under these same conditions. Some are clearly more exploitative and worse than others, but yeah, I think I started to relate to a lot of the workers I was talking to.
Charles, do you have a?
Yeah, so I got involved with the union from my shop because we were the first ones in the airport to go union in 2014. Like Ryan said, the union organizers came and kind of scouted us out, and I got a home visit. Somebody knocked on my door, and I sat on my porch with them and talked about the workplace and the issues and the things that was going on there. And we began to fight to become a unionized shop. And we won that. And then we got into contract negotiations and got pay increases where people who had been working for our company a lot longer than me had not been receiving any raises for multiple years, no vacation time, no other benefits for multiple years. And it was one of the things that kind of got me involved as a leader in the union, because it shouldn't be that our city and the hospitality industry is bottom of the barrel. I mean, most of us on a day-to-day basis go to a hospitality restaurant, or we use a hotel, or we go to sporting events and events at the stadiums all the time. And with the money that these companies are making, they should be able to treat and pay their employees well. So that's what got me in it. I just wanted to see the transformation from people who were living in deep, deep poverty change to be able, like my coworkers, most of them doubled their salary over our first contract over the course of 4 years. People who were constantly catching SEPTA to get from home to work and back, working 2-3 jobs in the airport just to survive and take care of their families, were able to make it to the point where they could buy cars now and drive, you know, cut out the commute, spend more time with their families, not have to work that third job. So that's why I'm in it.
And Patrick, what brought you to this particular corner of the writing world?
Yeah, sort of similar to Juliana, I guess, just working and thinking about the conditions of my work, which was like kind of crummy office jobs after college, realizing it was hard to find a lot of writing, especially poetry, around that topic. So people writing about their job, their workplace, their debt, their financial situations, paying rent, you know, like all those things were like my primary concerns because they had to be for like most of my life, and it just didn't seem like that was represented. So I wanted to sort of build a place to collect that and give a platform to people to talk about it.
For those of you listening, it looks like somebody else has joined us. We do have people here who are from the labor world, people who are organizers, people who are frontline workers. We've also got people who are journalists and creative writers, poets, all working in and around the themes of labor. When it comes to a discussion of organized labor, whose voices are given a platform? Juliana, this is, you know, a little bit for you, but what deliberate efforts do you make or can you make to center the voices of workers in your work?
Yeah, so at the Inquirer, and I guess in Philly in general, oftentimes the loudest person in the room was, or is, maybe was, John Dougherty. So the head of the building trades, he's the head of the electricians union, and the building trades are very politically powerful. They give a lot of candidates, and even though their numbers are smaller than some of the other unions like Unite Here and SEIU 32BJ, they would get a lot of coverage in the news, and that's for a lot of reasons. It's you know, it's about them giving money to politics, but there's also I think racial and gendered lines there. Their building trades are primarily white, and Unite Here and 32BJ, SEIU are primarily Black and brown. And so yeah, so there's certain kinds of unions that get covered a lot. The building trade, the police union, and sometimes the teachers union as well. And when I started on the labor beat, it was really important to me to write about all kinds of workers. So writing a lot about Unite Here, writing a lot about 32BJ, and also writing about workers that weren't in unions, workers like domestic workers and undocumented workers, workers that are not traditionally in organized labor. Sorry, was there another question? Did I answer the question?
I mean, you answered the question in style and grace, but I'm also curious, working as you have for the Inquirer, which is owned by a nonprofit, but a nonprofit that's controlled by a number of, you know, corporate interests. You know, it's the board, the staff of the nonprofit are all affiliated with a number of corporations. Do you ever feel like there's some impulse from the paper to generally cover labor in a certain way, or to cover, you know, the business owners, the corporations in Philadelphia favorably?
You know, I think that an instructive story there is that when I started at the paper in 2017, the labor reporter was taking a buyout and they were not going to replace her. And so there was not going to be a labor beat at the paper. And they didn't think it was working, like they didn't think it was being read, and they didn't think that it needed to be there. And I was hired to do workplace culture reporting. So it's stuff like office parties and Me Too, and like the passive aggressive notes people leave on the fridge. And I saw that there wasn't going to be a labor reporter and was really interested in labor, and so started putting stories around labor, and eventually became the labor reporter, which is like one of like the proudest, my sort of like proudest accomplishments. But I just moved to the investigative team, and they are once again sunsetting the labor beat in favor of a workplace beat. And this is like happening all over the country, and has happened all over the country. This isn't just a Philly problem. There's like six full-time labor reporters at like the 25 biggest newspapers in the country. So yeah, I mean, I think you're asking the right question about like how we cover labor. I don't personally feel pressure. I think sometimes I've been afraid that people would be like, she's biased, like she cares about the worker. That's like constantly like something I feel like I've had to worry about, but it's even bigger than just like how to cover it. It's even like, will it be covered at all?
Ryan, Charles, perhaps you could speak to that. Who gets to tell your stories? Who gives labor a platform with Juliana doing investigative work from here on out?
Well, I mean, Charles can comment about who tells our stories, but I'll just talk about how Juliana has done. I mean, such amazing work. I mean, it really is sad that you're not a labor beat reporter, because I remember, I ran the strike at Sky Chefs, and I'll never forget when Juliana came down and sat on the picnic tables and spoke to those members and those leaders outside about why they were voting to strike. And then putting the story of Joanne, who was a nurse back in Liberia, Yusufu, who has 4 kids and sends money back home, and Samai, who was a teacher in Sierra Leone, and putting those stories like that was the focus. It wasn't, this national fight against this company and why it was really like, it was through the stories of those workers and why they were standing up and doing something that very few workers do, which is vote and take the steps to lead a strike. And I think that's the power of good journalism, when those stories are front and center. It's not like a quick quote from a labor official or some soundbite, but it really is, let me sit down and talk to you for a couple of hours and hear about your life. And let me get to know you, which is, to me, is like, it's when a journalist is an organizer and is listening to those stories. And so I think that is what has been so exciting over the last few years, of seeing those stories be front and center in our fights. If you want to say some more, Charles, about that.
Yeah, so I will say it's kind of one of those things that we push for in our union, is to make sure that workers feel comfortable telling their story and to get their stories out there, to be able to share with people what working at Sky Chefs is like. For Nini, who's a cold food service worker who works in a 40 below refrigerator, stuff like that. People like myself who works in a terminal in the kitchen to go and sit down bar, in a to go and sit down bar, sharing my experiences there. People need to get their experiences across from what hardship they've been through, how it impacts their home life, and how their work life affects their home life and how it's been made better or how it needs to be made better.
I would add that, I get nervous speaking in front of people or speaking with a reporter. We all get nervous. It's a big deal. It's not like an everyday experience. And so we, as a union, we really push ourselves to spend the time with workers to walk through it. We've had a number of leaders who they get stage fright right before, we fear about the boss reading it and what impact is that going to have at work. But at the end of the day, that's good struggle, because some leaders will step up, share their story. They're stronger. They feel proud. They photocopy the article. They send it to their family and friends. I mean, I love it when we photocopy them and we hand them out in the workplace and everybody comes around. They're like, oh my God, Yusufu, look at you. There's real pride in that, because it is not an everyday experience, and in some ways it's, sometimes we'll have, video footage in the news down at a picket line, but it's when the story has some real depth that really, folks have real pride over that.
And that really does, confirm many of the things I think and feel about this, is that, it's about the triumph of good storytelling a lot of the time. And to that end, Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about the role that Prolit has and how you might be able to help tell these stories?
Yeah, I'm hoping we're telling these stories. There's been 4 issues out the last 2 years, and so what I've seen from a lot of literature, and I think, I guess similar to the way there's a corporate control of news media, there is a smaller, most of the time, corporate control of literary media as well. Or there's financial incentives, if not to, sell certain kinds of stories, or you have to be approachable to the right people for grants or fellowships or what have you. So with Prolit, and I'm not alone in this, there's several small presses and small magazines. I wanted to have something separate from any sort of financial interests. I wanted to encourage people who aren't being published elsewhere, who don't have MFAs, like the Master of Fine Arts degree, which oftentimes gives you access, friends who are editors, things like that, people who work day jobs, who, are doing work every day to tell their story. So yeah, we publish poems, stories, essays, all kinds of stuff. And the stuff that really gets me most is the stuff that's just detailing, not even just the sort of difficulty of labor, but just kind of puts you in an experience, and oftentimes it's have beauty alongside the hardship. Yeah, it's really important to me to get those stories together. So not just to put a couple out, but to have this whole sort of platform, whole issues sort of dedicated, telling a variety of stories, teaming with all these different experiences, points of view, positions in different industries. So I think that's been really illuminating for me, and I hope it is for others reading it as well.
Patrick mentioned the financial incentives to go one way or the other, and the largest employers, state by state, are generally university systems or Walmart. And so when we talk about who gets to control what's being said where, the voices of people who are associated with these monolithic employers They have an interest certainly in not making waves in their professional lives, but they've also got the difficulty of who is going to stand up to them, who's going to make these narratives when they're being told, heard. When a university, which does control a fair number of literary journals, things of that nature, has an interest in not speaking of these things. We did talk a little bit, Juliana, about the racial divide in unions, how some unions are given more of a platform. Those are very often white unions. We do have perhaps you've got better numbers for me, Ryan, but I believe there's nearly like 1 million union workers in Philadelphia.
I wish. I don't think it's that many.
It is several 100,000 at the
that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
It's 1 million workers. We would general strike all over.
Well, this is the question though: is can there be a general strike when there is such a division between unions sometimes, between the interests of unions? When we talk about, say, a police union and Unite Here, for example. And in the event that there is, some action, some coordinated action, with Juliana writing about something else, who is going to be telling this story?
Well, I am just you made me think about a struggle that we have down at the stadiums. We have it also at the airport and the hotels, but I come across it often at the stadiums. Oftentimes workers live very close to where they work. It's it's easy to get to, and so 5 years ago was when we began to expose the racial inequities in terms of the front of the house and back of the house for Aramark at Citizens Bank Park, in which the suite attendants were 97% white, right? It's a very high paying job. When you're taking tips, it's over $40 an hour. And then the utility workers, right? Concession workers were over 90% Black and workers of color. And so when we exposed that, it wasn't just about Aramark, feeling the heat. There was also white workers who then rebelled and were like, you're telling me I've been here 20 years, 30 years, you're going to take my job. And so it was rough, but those are good conversations to talk about what it means to train workers of color for front of the house positions, right? When positions open up, they shouldn't go to the boss's neighbor or cousin, right? But they should go to workers who are working inside the stadium, who've been there 20 years and moving up from a concession worker. And so I would say, even within our union, we still have segregation with front of the house and back of the house positions. And we have to tackle that. We have to confront that. And that's necessary and important work. I think in terms of like the larger labor movement, we have to join up with other progressive unions who are going to knock on the doors in races. Today, Charles was leading a phone bank for Larry Krasner yesterday. I was knocking on doors today for Larry Krasner, like where we are, we're joining up with other unions who have said that is an important fight. The DA race does not impact particular policy around airport wages, for example, but it does impact our membership, the policies of a district attorney. And so being out there knocking on doors is critical. And that is definitely not something that the entire labor movement is unified around, but I think necessary for us in terms of what type of social justice movement union we want to be in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, I think about when you talk about working in the stadiums, I think about the players' unions, how much solidarity there isn't there. So, Juliana, Can you tell us some more about the general landscape for these conversations? Ryan can speak, and Charles can speak very well to, you know, how these stories are received by frontline workers. They can talk about the rank and file enjoying seeing their stories, but how are these stories generally doing outside of that community? Like when we're talking to, you know, your average voter, for example.
Do you mean like in terms of, are people reading the stories?
Right, yes.
Yeah, I think there's been, I mean, in my experience at the Inquirer, there's been a lot of interest in labor. And I think, yeah, I think there's been like really a growing interest in like worker activism. And I mean, definitely during the pandemic, I think the pandemic shined a light on like so many problems in our society, but especially with work. And there's just been, yeah, I think it's like made it much more, it's made the issue like much more intense and like harder to turn away from, when like, you know, when you're ordering food and you have to like, I feel like it suddenly made you think about, well, what is it like for the people who are making the food? What is it like for the people who are delivering me the food? Like, how are they doing right now?
That disruption to services for the, you know, the general public is suddenly opens their eyes. Is that the?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think people have been really interested in labor stories. And I think there's also been a change. It feels like there's been a change in public perception around labor. And something I saw last year, if you remember, during the summer, everyone's trash pickup in Philly was really delayed. And trash was sitting on the street for days, and people were like, why isn't my trash getting picked up? But a lot of, and there was like a politician, there was a city council person, Brian O'Neill, who was like, why are these workers like, they're like going on a wildcat strike? And he was talking about how these workers were like not doing what they needed to do and like picking up the garbage. But like he was sort of a lone voice in that. Instead, what I saw was people were putting up signs saying they stood in solidarity with the sanitation workers and saying like they understood because we were living in a pandemic. And I think like that was a sort of sign of the times thing, where people weren't blaming sanitation workers, or maybe a decade ago, maybe it would have been different.
Yeah, there certainly have been historically, I suppose, some garbage strikes that have led to a great deal of enmity. I remember one of those once when I was in New York. But the pandemic has certainly really ripped open these conversations. And I want to know, I guess, without as many outlets covering labor, how do we carry forward the momentum, the awareness that was built during the pandemic? And I want to ask this a little bit towards Charles. You're in the middle of a campaign right now, Charles, and I'd like to hear quite a bit about that, and two, how we can all, you know, contribute to to expanding this narrative, to telling this story.
Yeah, so at the airport, we are fighting currently to get affordable healthcare at the airport. Most workers at the airport have terrible healthcare provided by their employer. Healthcare that barely covers anything other than preventive care, but God forbid you break a leg or you have a pregnancy, like you're going into deep, deep debt using these employers' plans. And so our councilman, Kenyatta Johnson, for the 2nd District, is our councilman for the airport, and he's fighting alongside us and understands that we need to have affordable health care at the airport for people to be able to not have to, mortgage their house or go into deep like credit card debt or have set up crazy long-term payments on huge medical bills. So he's trying to get it passed where we could get free health care across the board from end to end at the airport. And that would change the dynamic of so many people's lives there. I could tell you that there have been workers who have had like heart attacks and, had went to the emergency room and had to pay so much money, $10,000, $15,000 for what their insurance wouldn't cover. And on a job right now where the minimum wage at the airport is $14.25, which we fought for, and it'll be $15 come July 2022. That's a huge impact to your gross income,
Definitely.
We recently had a rally with SEIU 32BJ outside of Terminal B by departures, where we usually have our a bunch of different rallies and things where the councilman was, letting putting the bill out there to be known that it was going to be discussed. And so we were out there kind of letting it be known, we're here, we need healthcare. These employers are definitely all crying broke right now, but most of them, it's not the case. They're taking advantage of many grants that the federal government is giving them. So there's opportunities for them to do this and do the right thing and make sure that their workers have affordable health care.
Yeah, very often the workers are sacrificed for the shareholders. And I think we've all seen a lot of that recently with fast food, which was a pretty good story, I think. But a situation wherein, McDonald's, for example, was banking, a pretty significant profit and paying dividends while their workers were going without. Related to this this struggle for healthcare, Charles, I'm actually going to pivot over here to Patrick. There has been, a fair amount of conversation about unionization in the literary world. Perhaps you could speak to a little bit to the situation at small press distribution at various publishers that have gone union, like the New Yorker strike, for example.
Yeah, it's something I find really encouraging and really exciting. Small Press Distribution is a company that sort of warehouses and distributes books on behalf of small presses, located in Oakland, California, I think. A very popular service, seen as like very essential to like the success of a lot of small presses. But months ago, one of their workers wrote a sort of open letter on Medium about various workplace problems, including being underpaid, being abused by their boss.
Outright wage theft too, I believe.
Yeah, right. And the various like difficulties they had, like correcting those, going to the, not knowing who to go to for help, lack of assistance by the board of trustees, who are mainly people involved who are writers or people who edit small presses or teach, some of whom are like supposedly communists, but that's not very good. But there's been a pretty big backlash to SPD, not a big enough one yet, following that sort of expose, a group of people organizing to support that worker, and other workers have stepped forward as well. SPD hasn't reacted well, I don't think. They have not let go of the main culprit of the workplace abuses, Brent Cunningham. They just moved him to a different position. But I think the sort of support for the worker who came forward and unionization efforts at small presses and at bookstores, which is, there've been a couple recently, like Duke University Press and Powell's Bookshop, and the New Yorker, as you mentioned, similarly, and then Amazon, of course, which didn't go the way we wanted in Alabama, but I just think all of these things coming together, I think there's a moment now where I think writers are being pushed to realize that they are part of an economy. Like, I think creative workers, creative people who make art tend to think of themselves as sort of outside of the economy sometimes. I don't think that's correct. Because I read a book last year. The book is printed by people in Delaware, I think. It's sold in stores, it's sold online, it's shipped by people. Like, there's a whole
supply chain.
Sorry?
There's a whole supply chain.
Exactly, yeah. And all those people are employed by different people sometimes, or they're employed by Amazon. Many of them are exploited. Many of them don't get paid enough. And like, those people are doing their work to, help me get people to read my book in a way, and other people as well. I think that relationship has been obscured for a long time, and I think that several of these new unionizing and sort of efforts to call out abuse and exploitation have been really good for changing that conversation. I think there's still a long way to go, of course.
A long way to go, certainly, and in part because so many workers, white-collar workers, don't see themselves as being a part of the union struggle. I don't know how many people think that they're working in publishing in particular, making their $36,000 a year, are grateful that they have a desk job and think of that as a fine price to pay, really, for their labor. They're like, oh well, I have the comfort of of being a culture worker as opposed to a worker. But I do think that's changing very rapidly now. Certainly, some of the publishers are starting to see a lot of collective action. There have been incidents recently where Simon & Schuster, in particular, one of the biggest publishers in New York, has had to face down their own staff, non-unionized staff, I'll say, who don't want them offering a platform to hate speech, for example, or as Simon & Schuster would prefer to think of it, political beliefs held by the Trump administration. To that end, we do have certainly a broadening of the struggle, but still, an opportunity that I feel is being consistently lost to tell all of these stories. And one thing that I wanted to bring up is Ryan and I met when I contacted him looking for some way I could help with this. And Ryan was in the middle of a fundraising campaign that's ongoing to raise money for the Hospitality Academy. Wondered if maybe you wanted to tell us a little bit about that, Ryan.
Yeah, Charles actually got to run one of the youth programs with me that we did with the Philadelphia Youth Network.
Right on, Charles.
Yeah, a number of years ago. Yeah, so the Hospitality Academy is so essentially employers. Part of our fight is we push employers to put money into a training fund, and that training fund, there are now, I think, 10 employers who put money into it. And so we have been guided by the recommendations of the Black Work Matters report that was put out by Power 6 years ago. And two things in particular. One, we are pushing to recruit and create a pipeline from neighborhoods in Philadelphia that have the highest concentrations of poverty into good union jobs at the airport, at the stadiums, or at the hotels. And then the second piece is that we sort of focus on is really tackling, as I talked a little bit earlier, tackling the racial inequities between front of the house and back of the house. And so training our members. And so, Charles talked, he's now at Bar Simon. Before Charles was at Bar Simon, he was at another, Cantina, Laredo. But Bar Simon was our first training program. And so when, lots of bumps along the way when you run these programs, but what was powerful about that was that we got to run the recruitment. And so there was, one of the, I didn't know this until we were like in the middle of it, where folks were like proud of the union, or like, the union got me this job. And I was like, damn, that's awesome. That's so different than like, thank you, the boss got me this job. It was like, there was, before workers had even started working, they already were like, the union is where it's at. Like, the union is why I'm here. And so I think there's a lot of work in terms of us training and moving people into good union jobs. But in particular, when that restaurant opened, Bar Simon, I think it was 92% of the servers and bartenders were workers of color. And that, to be able to do that, when the union can run training programs and can really concentrate on how to move to change the imbalance in terms of the lucrative front of the house positions, it's going to go a long way in terms of us battling against poverty. It's not just the wages on the job, but it's also about who's working good union jobs and how many good union jobs we create.
And Juliana, you mentioned a little bit being able to meet with people and write their stories. And Ryan actually was kind of was describing you moving among the strike workers one day. I think about that in terms of the goals of the Hospitality Institute as well, because this is a tremendous story. It's been told in a few different iterations, right, as it's progressed, but also on a certain level, there needs to be like a strong narrative, and the hospitality industry has one with the academy. One of the things that strikes me about it, though, is part of the curriculum for the academy is a degree of literacy, right? Is training. Is that correct, Ryan?
Yeah, we've as it's grown, we started in 2017, but we added, for the culinary programs down at the stadium, we added 60 hours, moving the trainees one level higher in terms of their reading and literacy. So continue to just add on, so that as we are part of Jeff, the more funding we get, the more programming we can run. But yeah.
And I think about that in terms of who gets to present information. And so when we're talking about providing some basic education on one level, and on the other hand we have corporations who have PR people who are performing their work, who are creating press releases And then when we talk about Juliana's early days on the beat, when, you know, she's writing, what did you say, 2 to 4 stories a day? You know, we do have to talk about how information is being presented and to whom, and who makes, you know, this work accessible. Juliana and people like her, labor reporters, going out to interview people is an ideal situation, and one that's, you know, probably going to, you know, be less and less likely. But the, you know, the constant manufacture of information by these corporations won't end. They will still be putting out these press releases that will make news, you know, easily written and easily digested. I wonder if either of you could speak to a future collaboration, a way to bring journalism and labor closer together, so that these things aren't lost. These relationships between people like Juliana and Ryan. Take your time. I don't mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm still thinking about how there just needs to be someone at the paper who's focused on labor. Like something as simple as that. And that's not to say that, you know, right now there aren't people writing stories about workers. That is happening, but there's no one who's absolutely who's like just primarily focused on it. And there's a lot that's lost there in terms of, you know, understanding labor jargon, which was like something that took me a while to understand, and just sort of like things in like different things like successorship contracts and like I don't know, just all these like things that I think sometimes people in organized labor take for granted because they're like in that world. And I found when I started writing about labor that a lot of readers, a lot of people didn't like know or understand any of these things. So you had to do like double work. Yeah. I mean, I didn't either. And you had to do like the double work of telling the story, but also explaining the context and explaining like what things meant. And you couldn't assume that people would understand.
Yeah, you're educating yourself as you educate the reading public. And on the other hand, there's, you know, somebody offering some statistics about how whatever is being demonstrated against isn't quite so bad.
Yeah, and that's like the, you know, the journalistic practices. You need to go back and I mean, like, you know, you have one story, you have like a story that people are telling, so maybe be like workers talking about what their experience is like, and then you go to the employer and say, how do you respond to this? And it was always, it's often like really maddening because oftentimes it's like there's just like a statement saying something that kind of responds to it, but doesn't really, but basically is like saying that these people are wrong, but not really explaining why. And it always, yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the street noise. Okay. Yeah, it was always just like really maddening to me because I understand why we have a journalistic practice of like asking for different sides of the story. But I didn't actually feel like there was another side of the story being told a lot of the times if it's just like this statement that is like corporate jargon.
And then there's, of course, the delaying tactics where they'll say, oh, we'll have a statement for you as soon as this event is no longer newsworthy.
Yeah, that didn't happen. That didn't happen too much. I mean, and if they did, then you could just say they didn't respond.
Sure.
But yeah.
And Ryan, do you have a response to this idea that you know, there may be some ways to package labor stories for a general readership?
I mean, I just want to echo just how sad it is without a labor reporter who's like, it is, it's, you know, it's fewer stories of workers and the struggles of workers getting out there and reading about it. It's just, it's sad because, what Juliana, you said 5 or 6 labor reporters in the country. And, you know, you can feel it when you pick up the New York Times. It's just, the stories are often from a business perspective and, oh yeah, here's the plight of workers, but
it's disconnected from the activities of the employers.
Yeah, I don't know, I always come back to, like, if we aren't talking about the impact on working class people, if those stories aren't out there, then people, like, we all live in bubbles, right? I mean, it's you know, we rarely go out of our safe spaces, and when we can read about the plight of workers, we're going out of that comfort zone. We're, like, you know, hearing about a worker from Liberia who has 4 children there and is sending money back home, and what that's like. That is an experience that folks don't come across every day. And so when someone like Juliana can come down and hear it and then share it, I think it gives the workers more power. It puts the boss on the defensive because they know more people understand the plight of workers. And, you know, and it does, you know, because that is, we then take that to then move legislation, or to then move other policies. And it can't just be because some labor official is saying A, B, or C. It has to be because it has real impact on working class people. I would, you know, with the absence of labor journalists, I mean, I think it's, you know, I think we have to figure out ways in which we're creative in getting our stories out there. And this is one avenue, right? There are other avenues, but it's a difficult time because, you know, where to go, where to find the reporters, the journalists that are going to write a story, and how far does it get out is something. It's a new world and trying to figure that out. I think that's challenging.
Yeah, I mean, with the contraction of, you know, various news outlets, I have noticed a remarkable number of journalists out of work, turning to things like, you know, tiny letters and Substacks, a variety of newsletters that go to what's usually already a very sympathetic readership. And then there's people like, I think his name is Judd Legum, is that, and he does something that he calls accountability journalism. His background is less as a journalist than as a political worker. And so his work is very political. There's newsletters like Strike Wave, which collects labor news from all over the country, compiled by volunteers to be mailed to people's inboxes, email boxes. But it's a lot of preaching to the choir, I might say, when we have those small organs churning out these songs. They're playing for people who have written them or already heard them. The difficulty of cracking back into you know, mass media remains very, very prominent here, and something that I don't expect we're going to have like a solution out of this little think tank we've got going on here, but it's something that keeps me up nights. How to reacquire a large audience for stories that affect them.
I just want to commiserate some more.
Yeah.
There was, you know, I remember, you know, I don't know, I can't remember, maybe it was 8 years ago when City Paper closed up, and just, you know, how, you know, I remember, you know, Daniel Denver would write stories that got the voices of workers out there. And again, just coming back to that idea, we often photocopy our stories and have our committee hand them out to their coworkers. And there's really, people get a sense of power, like we're being heard. And when that folded, that was a real loss in the city.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I know less about that, as I was not in Philadelphia, but I have been reading that, you know, these papers were purchased by a man who then, shortly before he passed away, set them up as a nonprofit public good. But who the public is and what they think of as good is certainly negotiable. I certainly see, you know, projects like the Philadelphia Citizen masquerading as news a lot of the time, when it appears very often to be propaganda for developers. But you know, with a dash of social justice for the kids at home. But and you can correct me, Juliana, if I'm mischaracterizing their that news source. Pardon?
Oh no, I just shrugged. I can't say I read it very much.
That's fair and appropriate, perhaps. And you know, in the absence of having, you know, one, you know, really amazing take here, one takeaway that we can, you know, all work toward. I think, you know the people who we've gathered here today, the audience, such as it is, might all, you know, put their minds to this difficulty of trying to spread these stories, trying to make sure that this information is accessible, not just about, you know, people's lives, but about what, you know, legislation, what the daily impact of these things that would ordinarily be reported on mean for the lives of people living here in Philadelphia. And though we are a little bit earlier than I intended, do we have any final remarks from any of you? I would love to hear more about your current projects. If there's an investigation, Juliana, or a line we should be on, Charles or Ryan. If you've got a new issue coming out, Patrick, feel free.
I can't share what I'm working on right now.
Fair enough.
But I will say something I thought about as you were talking was there's a group of Starbucks workers who have been organizing for a while in Philly and across the country, and they have a newsletter that they put out. That they put out a few issues of it, and so it's like, yeah, it's like their own publication, and in it they have stuff like tips on organizing your coffee shop, and stuff like updates on this labor board case that they're engaged in right now. And you can scan, there's even QR codes that you can scan to get more information. And they I don't know if they actually do the hard copies, but they put it on Instagram. And I really like that as an example of workers just making their own media.
Yeah, the revolution will be scannable and grammable. And does anyone else have any parting thoughts for us?
Well, I have one.
Matthew's up there. Hold on, let's grab it.
When you mentioned strike wave and the loss of these labor journalist positions, these staff reporter positions on the labor beat, strike wave is a great thing, and it really jives with this. I think both Patrick's project, having independent, literary media on the left and for workers, but it jives, this old tradition that, workers have their own papers and built their own independent press, because as much as we lose these, labor positions, they're at bourgeois capitalist papers. And that's always a tension that, I'm sure, as Juliana was saying, came up in the work. And, strike wave they paid people. It's not just, I think the editorial collective is volunteers, but they've paid freelance journalists for their work, and people, both established reporters and not. And I think that's, then it gets sent around in emails, and that's not that dissimilar from, you know, photocopying a story and handing it out amongst members. So I think that, you know, there's the possibility of, you know, not that this is like a brain trust that's going to solve the problem or to like be an idea guy, but, you know, what does that look like on the local level? I mean, it's possible that, you know, people in the labor movement can write their own stories and share them with each other and do the thing, get the stories out that way. That it's important to talk to each other as much as it is to talk about, you know, the subscribers out in the suburbs or, you know, living in center city high rises.
Certainly. And this might actually address a little bit what Juliana was saying as well. It's like, can you think of other ways in which social media has figured into labor writing these days, beyond the newsletters that we've been discussing? Is it allowing for better mobilization through Twitter and Instagram, or is it too passing and too fleeting in the moment?
That might be more a question for maybe Charles and Ryan. I don't know if y'all know if it's helped with mobilizing. I certainly know that, like, tweeting about labor struggles, there's labor Twitter exists, and if I tweet about a labor struggle with a photo, it'll get like retweeted a lot and like liked a lot, but I don't know if that actually translates into more tangible.
Ryan, Charles?
Yeah, I think we have had success when it comes to using social media to increase a turnout for a rally and thing. Nowadays, people do use social media for so many things that it has become like a part of the organizing, and I think will be a part of the organizing for a long time to come. Yeah, I don't know if Ryan wants to necessarily speak about the things that they have done at the stadiums when it comes to concessions workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of us, you know, talking workers, talking amongst themselves, building relationships. You know, one I think it's all about that, how to build that network on social media. And so we'll often find that, you know, it takes organizing to make sure that our leaders are getting their coworkers to follow the page. And so what Charles was talking about in concessions, we've spent a lot of time building this concessions group, right? And so it's just concession workers at the stadium talking amongst each other, sharing stories, hearing about actions. And so I think there's a lot for us to learn, but I think it's how to do this work of having workers in a particular department talking about talking about their work, talking about, you know, whatever program the union is doing and how it relates to their work. But oftentimes at the stadiums, you know, there will be a department that is much more vocal, and so you hear less from the other workers. And so this is an attempt to get that group talking amongst themselves to strengthen their participation.
From part of our audience, we have a question. Do any of you have any experience or thoughts about connecting U.S. labor stories to international workers' struggles? I'm going to say no, Emma. They don't. No, we'll give them another moment.
Not quite related to unionization per se, but I'm really happy to have published several international pieces in Prolit. Just like a real treat when people send those in.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I am, so cut me off. We have somebody in the union who's, globalization, a lot of Marriott and Hilton are not just in Philadelphia, they're all over the world. And so being able to connect with workers and unions in other parts of the world when we have campaigns against those companies has been important. Sky Chefs, for example, is owned by Lufthansa Airlines, and so having the German unions, we had leaders go over to Germany and speak to those unions and speak to those workers, and so you can have, again, having the stories of a worker from Philadelphia or from Dallas going and speaking in front of the worker councils puts pressure. I mean, it builds solidarity, but also puts pressure on those companies.
Are there any other questions in the chat? Well, the lack of question. Emma continues. The US seems like a uniquely difficult environment for talking about labor, being the beating heart of capitalism and all. Wondered if we can learn more from workers' struggles in the global South. Perhaps we can.
Yes, we can.
Short answer, yes, Emma. Yes, we can and will. I am going to call upon our second reader now. Marie has been waiting in the wings, and I'm going to try to. Can somebody with some administrative privileges pull her out and set her up? There we go. And if you'll permit me one moment. Marie, I've got a bio for you here. Marie is a writer, editor, artist, and educator based in West Philadelphia. The recipient of an interdisciplinary research fellowship from Rutgers University in Camden and scholarship support from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Mass. She currently teaches in the Department of English and Communications at Rutgers Camden, where she received her MFA in creative writing. Her critical and creative work can be found in the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Believer, Entropy, and The Rumpus, among other publications. Take it away, Marie.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak or read a little bit at the end of this panel. It's been really, I think, really interesting and generative just hearing from organizers and journalists and editors all at once, and really has me thinking a lot more about the ways we figure ourselves as workers, think about ourselves as workers, organize, and maybe share stories. So I'm coming from maybe a creative writing angle, but I worked for 10 years in and out of restaurants, and now I'm an adjunct. So I think it's just been really interesting to hear about these different intersecting labor nodes. But I'm just going to read two poems. The first is from Prolit, and a quick note about it is that it uses language that comes from the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844 from Karl Marx. And there's also some language that I've cribbed from a Twitter user, Jeremiah Red. So not all these words are mine. So this is called Work Life. On the early morning bus, 24 quiet faces, 1,000 tired eyes, on the way to the factory, the classroom, the office, the rail line. A man rides to the flower shop to clip and trim and water. A man drives to the assembly line to spray color onto chain store signs. A woman prepares to tend another woman's child. And outside, a girl steps from her apartment to pour coffees, plate eggs, or clean soiled sheets on first shift at the far borough hospital. Do you remember Aesop's fable about the ant and his industry, how he carried grain on his back through summer, while grasshopper fiddled idle songs until fall. The less you eat, drink, and buy books, the less you go to the theater, the dance hall, the less you think, love, theorize, sing, paint, fence, the more you save, the greater becomes your treasure, which neither moths nor rust will devour, your capital. Did you know that if you worked from the blood dawn of this nation's beginning and say you made 5K a day, that you still would not be a billionaire? The less you are, the less you express your own life, the more you have, i.e. the greater is your alienated life, the greater the store of your estranged being. Remember that Aesop was a slave, and that you may spend your days trying to please money's masters, crushing onto the rush hour train, the early morning bus, exhausted on your double shift at the Farborough Hospital. Is this how you planned to save your own alienated life? Is this how I plan to save mine? And then this second poem is after a poem by a poet named Zaina Al-Sus. Her poem is called Now Let's Brainstorm. This one is called What to Call Ourselves After the Empire's Fall. Salt and oil, soft bread of the mouth, sonorous in friendship, campfire-haired Freedom Johns, full-petaled violet iris, girlhood daydreams, autumn afternoon of endless reds, browns, golds, and greens, systematic erotics of evening, a muscled wave, a people's movement, gray expanse of the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, Arctic oceans, underwater world banking, dance, 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 liberties of the duped and the damned, skin shedding, maybe magic, maybe fate, the queendom of heaven on dirt, one another's land bodies. What they steal from me, they steal from you. Your struggle is my own, the ecstasy of the present, the redemption of the dance floor, burning ledgers, freed accountants, food and drink, housing and clothing in adequate quality and quantity. Underminers of exploitation, blameless, shameless, immaculate heart, the superstructure of communal hand-holding, queer moonbeams and health in the hands of the community, uncontrollable agents of the social, unbewildered children of the earth, so well, so blessedly well. Holistic economists of the heart and things in their surroundings are plant and animal kin, amateur creations, the little snail's trail, ongoing transformations, each according to ability and need, each of us with a real chance at living.
Thank you very much, Marie. I'd like to thank Matthew as well, one of our other poet, and Juliana, and Charles, and Ryan, and Patrick, and our audience. Thank you so much for attending an event of the 20th Anniversary 215 Festival. If you liked it, you can keep up with the rest of our events, which will be proceeding for the rest of the year by signing up for our newsletter at 215festival.org.